Chapter 271, Dakja's Story 8. I raised my head at the entrance of the constellations. The constellations who favor you are looking at you. All of them were constellations who had once sided with me. The constellation, Coi Il Pil, is looking at you. The constellation, First Spiritualist of Joseon, is looking at you. Among them were constellations of Earth. The constellation, Goryeo's First Sword, is looking at you. There was also Chiak Yungyong, who I couldn't contact for a while. However, there was an even more welcome existence. The constellation, Secretive Plotter, is looking at you. Secretive Plotter. I didn't know his exact identity. All I knew was that he favored me and watched my scenarios. The constellation, Demon-like Judge of Fire, is clasping both hands together gently. The constellation, Prisoner of the Golden Headband, is forming fists. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is grunting and looking at you. All four of my early constellations had now gathered. Your story is being created in the 73rd Demon Realm. All the gazes poured towards me, and I felt like I had returned to the beginning of the story. Surya spoke. Child, I know your expectations, but they won't help you. The constellations are clever and won't make foolish choices like you humans. I saw my colleagues who were barely standing. My colleagues were centered around the fallen Yu Jonghyuk. Surya laughed. None of them will want to be the enemy of a nebula. As soon as he spoke, an earthquake occurred between Surya and I. The ground quickly became damp and turned into a sticky swamp. In the swamp where I would be sucked in if I took a step, someone was waking up. I immediately noticed who it was. The constellation Brash Swamp Predator has appeared in the demon world. The Brash Swamp Predator. He was a constellation of the Gourmet Association. He had fallen into debt and was dragged away by the executive branch. It was a lizard that was over 30 meters. The ancient lizard that awakened from the swamp let out a resounding roar. The Breaking the Sky Master recognized the Brash Swamp Predator and growled. If I was right, this time he wasn't my enemy. I smiled and asked, have you come to pay off your debts? In the past, the mass production maker had advised me, don't make too many enemies. I could have paid them back if you hadn't helped me. The giant lizard turned his head and showed hostility towards the constellations. I don't like them very much, that's why I came. The giant lizard finished the short conversation and rushed to the constellations. The constellations shouted at the monster who was running towards them. The Brash Swamp Predator was a narrative-grade constellation. He was scary when he was an enemy, but I couldn't feel reassured now that he was on the same side. The angry Surya cried out. Lackey of the Gourmet Association, aren't you afraid of the nebula? Nebula? Ha ha ha. Since when has the Gourmet Association cared for such a thing? Many members of the Gourmet Association were heretics of the star stream. They were those who practiced their will, regardless of whether they belonged to a nebula or not. The Brash Swamp Predator wasn't part of a nebula and was one of the most free-spirited in the Gourmet Association. Quack. The giant lizard swung his tail and the surface of the ground split apart while fragments shot up. The thunder-eating bird and mysterious bird of the Nile rushed towards him. The huge monsters started to fight and the surroundings quickly became a mess. In the center of the mess, Surya rose to the sky and looked down at me. One garbage doesn't change the result. Surya's light flooded towards me. It wasn't easy to avoid even if I used Way of the Wind and electrification. I couldn't contend with a Lakapala, but I didn't give up. My skin was torn and my bones were exposed. In the middle of this pain, I somehow tried to buy time. My nerves were focused on the system message in the air. The winner of the second game will soon be announced. The winner of the game was decided. No matter how strong the presence that delayed the scenario, there was a limit. In other words, I only needed to buy time and we would win this game. Child, it won't work out as you wish. I could feel a lot of probability moving. It was a probability originally not allowed for this scenario. The probability offered by Vedas was moving. The balance in the sky changed and the scales of probability were leaning. Vedas will has come here. A bright sun shone behind Surya. Sweat flowed as my body felt like it was melting. 1, 2, 3, 4. The light sources burnt the ground. I was unable to look at Surya since I would be blinded, so I focused on his shadow. The story King of the 12 Suns is shining. This was Surya of Vedas. He was a king who united the 12 sun gods. Do you see the difference in status now? My exhausted party members fell down and groaned. You. The brash swamp predator struggled painfully, and the only constellations looked up at Surya with awe. Surya was powerful, but he became even more powerful when the destruction scenario of Vedas ended. Surya, the sun god who absorbed all the power of Vivasvat and Savitar, became a monster who turned the earth of the 265th round of ways of survival into a hell of fire. Still, no matter how strong the enemy, I had to struggle. The stigma Song of the Sword LV 3 has been used. Your sword is filled with the words left by the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare. In the night, a god appeared in his dream and said, "You will win big if you do this, otherwise you will lose." It was a verse I heard when dealing with the lesser dragon. It is the stigma of a great grade constellation. You are using a petty trick. Thanks to the effect of the skill, it was like I wore sunglasses and could see the light source in front of me. As I recalled, this verse had the effect of telling the enemy's weakness through color. The green showed the strong areas and the red showed the weak areas. I stared at Surya with my eyes wide open. I stared and stared again. Cold sweat flowed down my back. Yes, what are you seeing? The smiling Surya was slowly approaching me. You can keep stealing stigmas. You might have risen to become a constellation, but you were born human. Surya's whole body was green. I couldn't see any weaknesses. A human history can't transcend a god. There is no such thing in the star stream. I couldn't deal with Surya alone. It was impossible even with the brash swamp predator's help. I threw my torn coat and spoke. The balance of probability is tilted. This means I can put more weights on it. The balance won't tilt, no matter how comes. My story wasn't a myth. I wasn't a god or a hero. My story might be a common one in the star stream. The constellations in the night sky are making a decision. Even so, someone in this world was listening intently to my story. That remains to be seen. Come Goryeo's first sword. There were explosive sparks, and a meteor fell through the dark clouds. The constellation, Goryeo's first sword, is responding to your call. A spectacular sword energy tore through the sky. It was the three-sword style I had previously seen. Who called me Chiak Yungyong? The sword struck like a thunderbolt and deeply wounded one of Surya's sons. Along with the blinding explosion, Surya's voice was heard. A trivial great-grade constellation dares. A hot flash flooded towards the ground and something thumped against the ground, sending me and my colleagues back. Once I came to my senses, I was in the arms of a man. In terms of size, he was no smaller than the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. It has been a long time, descendant. The magnificent sight of Goryeo's first sword was in front of me. It's been a long time, old man. Your status has changed. The great grade Chiak Yungyong was now narrative grade. It is all thanks to you. Several things happened. I had expected it. Chiak Yungyong had joined in the fight against the outer god. He would have gained a powerful story and risen to a higher level. The debt can finally be repaid. Chiak Yungyong stared up at the sky, and the indirect messages of the constellations followed. The constellation, prisoner of the golden headband, is murmuring to himself in anger. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is started gloomily. Perhaps the other constellations also wanted to come here. However, there were constraints on probability, and they couldn't move in front of the nebula's eyes. In particular, Uriel belonged to Eden, and the problem was more complicated. If she did something wrong, a great war between good and evil might occur. I wasn't disappointed despite not receiving help from Uriel. It's coming. Surya's beams of light were coming in waves. I knew that the gods on the Indian side don't play around, but they are truly monsters. Chiak Yungyong protected me and cut down the waves of light. However, Chiak Yungyong's blade was slightly corroded. I might be able to cut the great mountain and the sea, but I haven't cut the sun yet. If I knew there was such a monster, I would have brought Yi. Yi was probably the sun hunter in Chinese mythology. He seemed to be an acquaintance of Chiak Yungyong. Even so, you wouldn't be able to deal with Surya, a constellation with the constitution of an emperor. I'll deal with you. The founder of humanity rushed towards Chiak Yungyong. The great men fought, and the surrounding area was devastated by the sword energy. The 73rd demon realm is snooping around your story. Then something flowed from my chest up towards the sky. They were the sentences I obtained from the last game. Surya shouted with a thunderous voice. What are you doing? There is no time left, kill them quickly. These sentences were materials that made up the giant story. Finally, the giant story of this world started to fluctuate. The Demon King, maker of discord, is showing hostility towards you. The passive Demon Kings finally started moving. The heat sent from the maker of discord blew me through the air, and I felt the pain of my entire body tearing apart. I had 2 allies, but the battlefield was outrageously disadvantageous. The Demon Kings released their strength, and the scales of probability once again creaked. I needed the help of more people, but who could deal with these powerful Demon Kings? I thought hard but couldn't figure out a constellation who would help. Suddenly, the approaching Demon King slowed down. Fire with full force. There was the sound of cannon fire, along with a familiar girl's voice. Odyssey, it's me. The constellation, Maritime War God, is looking at you. I'm sorry I'm late. On the moat in a distant part of the industrial complex, Li Jihai's ghost fleet was firing towards this side. The indirect messages of the angry Demon Kings filled the air. 2 Demon Kings turned towards Li Jihai. Jihai. It was good that she came to help, but it was unreasonable with only Li Jihai. Her opponents were 2 Demon Kings. If she did something reckless, she would be killed immediately. Run away. I quickly moved, but it wasn't easy due to all the injuries I had suffered. The Demon Kings were entering Li Jihai's vicinity. This couldn't continue. If I used Way of the Wind. Then someone grabbed my shoulder. Doctor SSI, doing things alone again. I told you not to be like this. Was it because I had been burnt by Surya's light for too long? I couldn't see the woman's face properly. However, I knew who she was from her voice alone. I'm late because I lost the coin toss. Don't be too upset. The woman walked towards the Demon Kings. Wait a minute, He1 SSI. Young He1 was strong. She probably became stronger after doing the personal scenarios. Nevertheless, it was too unreasonable for her to deal with a Demon King, even if she used judgment time against the Demon King. I know what you're thinking, but don't worry. Was I mistaken? Angelic wings seemed to overlap on her back. It is because I'm not fighting. It was a huge status I had never felt before. The Demon King rushing towards Li Jihai looked over with an astonished expression. The power of the constellation descended towards Young He1, covering the entire demon world and turning it silver for a moment. The constellation, demon-like Judge of Fire, has appeared in the 73rd Demon Realm. Chapter 272, Giant Story 1. Archangel Uriel had appeared in the 73rd Demon Realm. In the latter half of the original novel, Uriel had descended directly in an incarnation body. However, now it was only the 25th scenario. The confused mutters of the Demon Kings and constellations could be heard. What ridiculous. The transparent shape of Uriel appeared behind Young He1, who had closed her eyes. Along with a splendid aura, Uriel's long golden hair waved in the air. The balance of probability was leaning again. The completely out of equilibrium balance was gradually being restored with the appearance of Uriel. No, now it felt like this side was becoming heavier. The even more surprising thing was Uriel's power. All fights on the battlefield ceased. Surya watched with tense eyes while all the fighting constellations stopped. The descent of an archangel was also a tremendous event for the constellations. the first one to speak with a demon king with an owl's face who was holding a burning sword. "Archangel, you dare appear here." I knew who he was, maker of discord, the demon king of the 63rd demon realm, Andras. He had cursed Han Suyong, who once killed his subordinate. Then the demon king beside him also opened his mouth. "Do you want to be a corpse, Archangel?" A skeleton wearing a crown and green armor, the monarch who is a philosopher about corpses. He was the demon king of the 54th demon realm, Murmur. They might be lower-ranked demon kings, but they were both stronger than me. Even so, there was a strange feeling in the expressions of these two strong existences. It was fear. After her descent, Uriel slowly opened her eyes. Her stunning emerald eyes took in the world, and the color of the world changed. I felt like my heart was frozen despite not even making eye contact with her. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is looking at the 73rd demon realm. The archangel's gaze implied destruction. It was a gaze that looked at the last mountain of the world for the sake of purifying the world. The 73rd demon realm trembled at her gaze. Black, hasn't it been a while?" The two demon kings took a few steps back. Yong Hee-won's mouth curved subtly. Didn't I previously tell you not to carry that blade before me? I'm annoyed because of the overlapping characteristics." At the words, Andras slightly lowered the burning sword. Andra's owl eyes blinked rapidly, and Murmur's skeletal jaw shook violently. It was Murmur who stepped forward first. "Foolish Archangel, do you know what your action means? Or has Eden decided to intervene in the selection?" "Black Square, I came on my own." I was reminded of Uriel's setting. I had forgotten due to Uriel's kindness towards me, but she was one of the most fearsome archangels of Eden. The demon-like judge of fire. She was crueler than any archangel and slaughtered the most demons. She raised her hand towards the air and a white flame sword appeared. In front of her sword, all flames extinguished like a tribute. It was the sword containing the flames of hell. This was Uriel's star relic. The moment she pulled out her sword, the demon kings made an urgent expression. "Did you forget the agreement? Eat Black Square like you." "What?" Hit the filtering. The archangels of Eden had their own filtering in order to preserve the dignity of their nebula. Then Uriel glanced at me. "Kim Dokja." Did I look too nervous? Uriel smiled awkwardly at me. Hello." It was an embarrassing and awkward greeting compared to her former appearance. Many constellations are speechless. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is pointing out that it doesn't match. The demon kings who had just been threatened watched with an absurd expression. I regained my senses and bowed. "It has been a while, Uriel." "Yes." Uriel laughed. "You are loved by an archangel. You have acquired a new story. The story person who is loved by an archangel has been acquired." Maybe she thought I was afraid and bombarded me with indirect messages filled with caring. Frankly, I was a bit impressed. There were a few constellations who favored me so far. Even so, there was no one who helped me as much as Uriel. I didn't do anything for her. I was always the one on the receiving end. Even so, Uriel came here today for me. Uriel raised Jung Hee-won's arms and exclaimed triumphantly, "Don't worry, Kim Dokja. I'll kill them all for you." I knew this was a performance. This was the demon world. It was obvious that something would happen if an archangel exerted their power here. Nevertheless, for Uriel to say so. "Uriel. Qualia. Wait a minute, Uriel." Hell flames rose from Uriel's sword and continuously soared towards the sky. This was the true hell flame's ignition. It was the real power of Uriel that could turn the world into a sea of flames with one blow. The archangel is crazy. Run away. Completely crazy. The freaked-out constellation started to flee. I didn't think Uriel would exert her real power. The hiding Dokgek finally appeared. Wait a minute. Archangel, please calm down." His cunning face was flushed. The scenario was delayed until the announcement of the winner, and now. Uriel spoke like she had read my mind. Why yes. Scenario Black Square. Docky by Black Square CK guys. Uriel had a really angry expression. The sky of the demon world was howling from her rage. The moment that the Archangel's sword was going to touch the ground. The Demon King, immeasurable austerity, is furious. The black magic power in the sky was raging wildly. The Demon King, ruler of the East Hell, is staring at the Archangel. The Demon King, devil of principles, is raising his status. The Demon King, Black Mane Lion, is heading towards Eden. The fearsome and highly ranked Demon Kings appeared one by one in the channel. Damn it, there was going to be a war in the demon world. However, the Demon Kings weren't the only ones who appeared. The constellation Guardian of Youths and Travel has entered the channel. The constellation Lily Pin of Aquarius has entered the channel. The constellation Commander of the Red Cosmos has entered the channel. The highest level constellations who could make everyone nervous just by appearing. The major constellations of Eden entered the channel, and the volume of the channel grew drastically. Bu trembled like it was painful. The constellation Scribe of Heaven is watching the demon-like Judge of Fire with severe eyes. Uriel's sword trembled. It felt like time had frozen. All the demon kings and archangels were concentrating on Uriel's sword. The future of the demon world and Eden depended on the direction of this sword. The demon kings of the demon world and the archangels of Eden have opened an emergency meeting. All this time, all demon kings and archangels in the scenario will be urgently summoned. There was the sound of a great probability moving, and Uriel's sword disappeared in the air. Young Hee-won's body shook as the energy of the archangel left the demon world. Uriel glanced at me with a light smile. I wanted to help you until the end. In hindsight, I realized Uriel's intentions. This can't be. It wasn't just Uriel who disappeared. The demon kings who descended slowly disappeared in the sparks of probability. Uriel sacrificed herself to tie up the hands and feet of all the demon kings here. It is amazing. Chiak Yungyong muttered to himself with admiration. A majestic archangel making such a great sacrifice for you. I could easily predict the great punishment Uriel would face. An archangel who broke the convention of the good-evil war with her own will. She would probably receive harsh sanctions from Eden. Please win, Kim Dokja. I reached out to the disappearing Uriel, but she had already scattered into ashes. I quickly embraced the fallen Young Hee-won. Young Hee-won had just taken on Uriel's status and fell asleep with an exhausted face. I raised my head as I felt pressure from the sky and saw Surya watching everything. My judgment was wrong. I didn't think you were a constellation who could call an archangel here. Thanks to Uriel, there was no need to worry about the participation of the demon kings. However, there was something worse. A more serious light appeared in the eyes of the silent Surya. The same was true for King Oedipus and Manu, who were guarding the left and right of Surya. From now on, I will be sincere. Surya's new energy shot through the sky. The surrounding air changed and a huge wind pressure hit the area. After a while. What is that? My party members approached me one by one. The first one to speak was the weary Jang Haeyoung. When will this hell end? What the hell is that? Beyond the radiant sun, something was flying through the distant universe. Something was ripping through the air. It was like the sound of meteorites colliding. I looked closely, and a huge carriage was flying towards this place. Whenever the gigantic golden mare accelerated, the entire demon world shook like it was going to burst. A carriage. Could this thing be called a carriage? No, should it be called a locomotive? No words fit. The only thing certain was that the object that was a size that couldn't be understood with common sense was heading towards this direction. It would be a disaster for this world. Yu Sanga opened her mouth. Surya's chariot. According to legend, it is over 130,000 kilometers in length. 130,000, does that make sense? Jang Haeyoung asked, and Yu Sanga shook her head. That's why it's a myth. The Indian myths claim that giant turtles and elephants held up the earth. Thus, It wasn't strange if a locomotive of such a huge scale appeared. The problem was that we had to deal with that disaster. You have watched a part of the giant story, Vedas. Your story comprehension has increased. Was this the sincerity mentioned by Surya? I admired the status that caused chills to go through my body. I felt overwhelming despair just because it approached this side. I had only watched some of it, but this strength was different from an ordinary story. It was the reason why I had to get a giant story. Shit, run. Some constellations were already hiding from the rushing carriage. There were no constellations who would be safe after being hit by it. Chiak Yungyong muttered, "Things are really difficult. He seems to truly want to destroy this world." "Are you scared?" "No, it's interesting." Chiak Yungyong laughed like he was truly having fun. The moment I tried to say something to my party members, someone stood beside me. It was Chiak Yungyong or a constellation. "You woke up." I looked over and saw Yu Jonghyuk standing up with the black demon sword. The character Yu Jonghyuk has used recovery LV 10. Yu Jonghyuk's body had finally healed to the point where he could use recovery. The last of Yu Jonghyuk's vitality was burning on the dark sword. The mouth and vocal cords were still slow to recover, so Yu Jonghyuk didn't speak. Instead, I heard Yu Jonghyuk's thoughts through Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. "Kim Dokja." "Yes. Perhaps this would be the last fight in the demon world. The 73rd demon realm is focused on your choice. This time I couldn't guarantee anything. Someone here could die. Maybe Yu Jonghyuk and I would die. Nevertheless, I declared, let's go." Yu Sanga and Lee Hyunsung nodded, while Shin Yusung climbed onto the Chimera Dragon. Lee Jihai looked at the sky from the moat and also nodded. There were no longer any constellations to help us. Now there were only humans here. This didn't mean it was a fight with no chance of winning. It was because I had already bought enough time thanks to Uriel. The 73rd demon realm is responding to your choice. Perhaps it was a mistake for Surya to show his sincerity. In the face of the coming calamity, we wouldn't be the only ones who would come to an end. Just like first Murim in the destruction scenario, the 73rd demon realm approached the time of choice. The giant story of the 73rd demon realm is germinating. There was no world that wanted its master to be the one that destroyed itself. The 73rd demon realm has chosen its master. The perplexed Dakibus and constellations let out exclamations at this message. However, I didn't hear any of them. It was because now I wasn't listening to the story, I was talking to the story. Your giant story has started talking. Chapter 273, Giant Story 2. Surya floated in the air and looked down at the ground with a complicated gaze. The 73rd demon realm was surrounded by a bright light, as sentences were woven into one being. It was the sight of the world choosing its master before the enormous destruction flying from the universe. Surya muttered, "It is only the 25th scenario, yet a giant story has been obtained. There is such a thing in the star stream." Surya had lived for a long time, but he couldn't come up with a name. There was Hercules of Olympus, but he was a half-god, not a pure human. King Oedipus exclaimed, "Surya, it's fine. It is still germinating and you can crush it." The giant story was unlike any other story. It was the sum total of numerous tales and a story that guaranteed a tremendous probability by itself. However, it might be a giant story, but it was only beginning. The demon king of salvation was just a superficial being who fortunately rose to the status of a constellation. Nevertheless, why couldn't Surya easily feel confident? "Surya, what's wrong with you? Let's finish it." All giant stories were the beginning of the end, the story that headed towards the end of this epic scenario. Even so, getting a giant story didn't mean that everyone would get the qualification of the end. Some giant stories were connected with Black Square, but others didn't go near the vicinity of Black Square before disappearing. "Surya, it is because you can't get the qualification of the end." He didn't forget Asmodeus' words. In his tranquil rage, a message entered Surya's ears. "A new scenario has been given to you. You will be the destruction of the 73rd demon realm." Surya frowned at the undesirable role assignment. The star stream, what do you want from this old body? He lost one of his 12 sons to Chiak Yungyong and wasted a great deal of energy against Asmodeus. In addition, he had exhausted most of the probability given to him. Surya, you don't have to go by the book. I have an idea. There is a way to subdue them without fighting. Surya frowned. Oedipus, are you going to use a despicable trick again, against humans? That isn't it? I am the supreme god of light, Surya. The great sentences of Vedas were shining in Surya's halo. Even if I can't use my full strength, I will never lose to humans. Oedipus shut his mouth in front of the overwhelming status. Surya raised his hand, and the paused carriage started the violent charge again. The locomotive made a deafening sound as it crashed through the atmosphere. Red and blue flames sparked from the head. The first one to speak was Yu Jonghyuk. It doesn't seem like 135,000 kilometers. If a train of that size really appeared, it would seem like a giant planet was falling. Chiak Yungyong told me his words are correct. It is around 30 kilometers long. Still, that is enough to destroy this place. Demon King of Salvation, what happened to the giant story? It has just started talking. The sentences are slow to gather. The giant story of the 73rd demon realm was safely obtained, but things weren't over just by receiving it. It needs more time to work properly. We have to slow down the train. Perhaps this train was all that the present Surya could mobilize. There was a chance for us if we managed to block that train. I looked back and saw Chiak Yungyong already prepared to jump forward. Please, Goryeo's first sword. Believe in me. Chiak Yungyong shot forward towards the sky. Yu Jonghyuk and I chased after him, and the rest of the group followed on Shin Yusung's chimera dragon. The thunder-eating bird and mysterious bird of the Nile flew to interfere with us, but the brash swamp predator bit at their wings. Leave these guys to me. The closer we got to the head of the train, the more I realized the enormous scale of Vedas. The width of the head of the train was a few hundreds meters, and it was at the level of an outer god. Haileapu! Chiak Yungyong shouted and showed his three-sword style. Two-sword style, two-sword mountain chop. Chiak Yungyong's slash that cut through a mountain hit the train. The head of the train met Chiak Yungyong's status and let out a strange sound. It deviated from its course, but the speed of the train didn't slow. In the formidable heat, it was Chiak Yungyong's sword slash that was melted away. However, Chiak Yungyong didn't stop. Three-sword style, three-sword ocean chop. A strike that cut the sea. It felt like there was a tsunami, and the speed of the train was reduced to a slight degree. The biggest achievement was the explosion to the lead car, creating an internal access point. It will be easier to move inside. I will slow it down from outside. Chiak Yungyong emitted a strong magic power from the head of the train. Still, it was hard for Chiak Yungyong to deal with an object of this speed alone. I'll help you, Ajashi. Shin Yusung's chimera dragon moved to the head of the train with Chiak Yungyong. The second-grade monster, the chimera dragon, created intense wind pressure, and the speed of the train was further reduced. Chiak Yungyong cried out, I have somehow bought 20 minutes. Surya will be in the car at the end. Knock him down and this story will disappear. Go. We nodded and entered the interior of the train. The train looked like a subway built for a giant. We adapted to the inertia to a certain extent and pressed the button to go to the next compartment of the train. The door won't open. This train is only available to the constellations of Vedas. Yu Jonghyuk didn't hesitate to activate the breaking the sky swordsmanship and hit the door. There was a dent in the door, but it didn't open. Amazing! Unlike Chiak Yungyong's expectations, the train's internal strength was formidable. It wouldn't be hard to break if Yu Jonghyuk and I were in good shape, but the train was 30 kilometers long. In other words, we had to consider the distribution of power. Then the first sentence of the giant story was heard. The story started on the subway. Sparks surged and my stories were released into the air. I felt waves surging from a distant place. It was the sign of a very old story. I looked back and the party members seemed to be feeling something similar. The first story of your giant story has begun. Yu Jonghyuk, Lee Hyun-sung and Yu Sanga looked at me. The sparks that flowed like the tide was transforming the scenery around us. Lee Hyun-sung murmured with astonishment, this. Every giant story was a different story. Some involved the birth of a hero while others told the birth of a world. Our story wasn't a hero's biography or a creation story. This story was our survival record. The number 3807 was on the back door of the train. I looked around and sighed. It is the subway. All stories invoked stage transformation when the place or person involved in the story collided. The 3807 car of the 3434 Bulgwang train. It was where Yu Sanga and Lee Hyun-sung became my colleagues and where I met Yu Jonghyuk. All of our stories started here. Lee Hyun-sung's fists were clenched as he opened his mouth with a tense expression. I remember that time. It isn't a good memory, but Yu Sanga was watching me with a faint smile. Even so, I often think about it. It wasn't a memory I could happily recall, someone's death and the hell of an absurd scenario. It wasn't a memory I could feel nostalgic about, but it was a history that we survived. Lee Hyun-sung smiled and placed his hand on the door. I think I can do it somehow. There was a soldier who wanted to be righteous. Eventually, everything became a story. It was hard, sad, and even something I wanted to forget. After all, everything was a story. I didn't expect it would be comforting for us now. There was only one thing we could know. The constellation prisoner of the golden headband is watching your party. The constellation, secretive plotter, is listening to your story. In a world where sadness and joy were useless, we had to continue the story. The door, which didn't open to Yu Jonghyuk's breaking the sky swordsmanship, started to open at Lee Hyun-sung's power. The giant story dwelling in Lee Hyun-sung's body started exerting its strength. The character Lee Hyun-sung has used the stigma Great Mountain Push LV. 10. When I thought about it, Lee Hyun-sung was the one who opened the door to escape. Go quickly. Lee Hyun-sung opened the gap and our party ran. Nevertheless, it was only one door and the train was still long. This time, it was Yu Jonghyuk who came forward. I will break through next. I suddenly remembered a long time ago. The regressor who annihilated the other incarnations on the train and rushed forward like a tank was now in front of me. There was the strongest and loneliest man in the world. Yu Jonghyuk put away his sword and concentrated all his magic power on his fist. Then he slammed his bare fist into the door. The door of the car, which was unharmed before the sword, was torn apart by his bare hands. This was the effect of stage transformation. It was unfortunate for Surya that his main story was this train. Dokja SSI, I don't think we need to break this car. Yu Sanga figured something out and yelled. Just like when I found the opening device, Yu Sanga found a way to open the car door without force. There was also a woman who hid herself for others. One car, another car. We kept moving forward. It was as if we were living history again. There was the sound of hammering from the outside of the train. Lee Jihai was also struggling to reduce the speed of the train. The sword demon wounded, after losing a relationship, was met. The Chimera Dragon's roar was heard. In my arms, Bu raised her head and looked at the head of the train. To be exact, it was in Shin Yusung's direction. A child born in the gap between past and future wept. The next moment, the Chimera Dragon let out a formidable roar. The train tilted, and the speed of the train was further reduced. I didn't know, but I thought Bu might have given something to Shin Yusung here. We aren't halfway yet, we have to hurry. As Yu Jonghyuk stated, we were still far away from the end of the train. More than 10 minutes had already passed. The speed might be reduced, but the industrial complex would be completely destroyed at this pace. To make matters worse, we faced a challenge when we reached the next car. A ray of light shot towards us. Lee Hyun-sung blocked it for me and held his shoulder. You can't go any further. Founder of humanity, Manu and several other constellations were waiting there. Yu Jonghyuk directly used breaking the sky swordsmanship against them, but it wasn't enough to break through the constellations on the defense. They knew they had to drag out time here. I was going to use the magic power I had saved when the ceiling of the train started to be squeezed. Something was destroying the train with an immense magic power from outside. What's going on? It was at least a narrative-grade constellation. They couldn't destroy the shell of the train unless they had the power to match Chiak Yungyong. Muov. Then Jang Haeyoung's voice was heard outside the train. Kim Dokcha, they came. The next moment, the entire ceiling was torn off and two beings appeared with Jang Haeyoung. The constellation of a small planet is looking at you. It was a small person filled with a brilliant blue-white energy and a huge woman releasing a blue aura. Funnily enough, my vision seemed to blur for a moment. Where is my disciple? There was the strongest small person in the world as a teacher. It seems that we're a bit late. The world of the strongest giant was saved. They were existences with enough power as Chiak Yungyong who could help us. Transcendent. In front of Manu, the two transcendents of First Murim descended. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint, Namgung Minyoung, the Paradox Beekchung, Kiajio's Rodgram. Namgung Minyoung glanced at us and said, "Do it properly until the end, otherwise I'll kick your ass." Kiajio stared at me and declared, "You will pay the price for lying to me. I won't allow your death until then." Kiajio's and the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint fired their skills at the door to the next car. The energy of Breaking the Sky swordsmanship and electrification combined and caused a formidable wind pressure to rise. The constellations shrank back at their momentum. The fearsome waves of magic power advanced and crushed the doors blocking our way. It was a straight road prepared for a short period of time. Yu Jonghyuk met my gaze and we started running. The exclusive skill, Way of the Wind LV, 11+1 is activated. Way of the Wind and Red Phoenix Shunpo assisted each other as we ran. We soon reached the last car of the train. Finally, there was a man who knew the ending of all these worlds. This story didn't exist in Ways of Survival. It was a story that never existed before. It was a story that would lead me to the ending I wanted. I opened the last door of the train. Chapter 274, Giant Story 3. Surya was beyond the last door. Yu Jonghyuk's fist struck the door and broke it down, revealing a pierced skyline with strong winds. The last train car with Surya was cut apart, as if it had been ripped out by something. "You came sooner than expected." Surya stared at the sky and spoke with his back to us. A square space was visible beyond the cut train, the light of the divine being stretched out into the darkness. It was like a palm gathering sand on a vast beach. I deliberately spoke in a polite tone, "Surya, let's stop here." The divine light that couldn't touch the providence of the universe looked at me. Surya's eyes stared at me. They seemed to be saying that even if they didn't understand the star stream, there was no way they couldn't read everything about me. A man who knows the ending of all the worlds. It is a really wild story. Perhaps Surya had heard the sentence of my giant story. Before I could answer, King Oedipus stood by Surya's side and replied, "It is just a metaphor, a pun." It was rather fortunate if he thought so. I felt a bit uncomfortable since the story contents came directly from me. The constellation Mass Production Maker is questioning your sentences. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy is wondering about your giant story. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is telling him to be nervous. The constellation Maritime War God is forming clenched fists. The constellation Secretive Plotter is looking at you. Surya's gaze towards me was changing. I realized that no matter what I said, I couldn't stop him. "Come on, child. The time given to you is 10 minutes. Surya's forearms were raised in a fighting posture. His size gradually became bigger as he opened up his status. He didn't use any weapons. Surya intended to exclude me simply using the pure power of stories. 10 minutes later, this carriage will collide with the demon world. There was no more need to delay, and Yu Jonghyuk rushed in first. A blue aura reminiscent of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint emerged from Yu Jonghyuk's body. The Breaking the Sky swordsmanship was spreading its light. I wasn't the only one affected by the giant story. Yu Jonghyuk also had a stake in this story. Despite his injured body, Yu Jonghyuk was now able to exert a power equivalent to a constellation. There was the sound of a blade and a pole colliding. It was Surya who received Yu Jonghyuk's attack. Q. King Oedipus let out a pained groan as he confronted Yu Jonghyuk. Qak. Oedipus squeezed out power from an overheated incarnation body, but he seemed to be having a hard time dealing with Yu Jonghyuk. Kim Dokcha. Along with Yu Jonghyuk's cry, I leapt through Oedipus' defenses and headed to Surya. In the air of the train, the several times larger Surya greeted me. The exclusive skill Electrification LV 12+2 has been activated. I was surrounded with the light of electrification, and a blue-white energy struck Surya's chest. The other time, Surya stopped my electrification with one fist. However, this time was different. Surya's skin was touched by the blue-white energy and started burning. This was from a slight blow. Surya's eyebrows twitched with surprise. I flew through the air and collided with Surya's fists. The shock shook my heart, but I endured it. The power of the giant story is working for you. The world's sentences were swirling around me. The power allowed me to compete with the mighty narrative-grade constellation. This was a great story, but Surya was still alive. I said it before, you can't win with the skills you have stolen. Maybe it was as Surya stated, I always struggled with the skills of others. This isn't something that I stole from others, I read it. Read. As Persephone told me, an existence was a story. Memories of sentences that had been read for many years. Everything that I had read and seen now became me. The exclusive skill, Fourth Wall, is strongly activated. On the fourth wall, the sentences of the giant story emerged. This is the story of a reader. I ran towards Surya. In the trail of my run was the countless hours I spent alone reading. It was an ordinary life. I sat alone in a dark room and read ways of survival. On the bus after my part-time job was over, in the army, in the classroom, on the subway home from work. At the same time, it is the story of Dokcha. I lived in that world alone. I entered the mind of countless characters and became different beings again and again. Only this story. Therefore, I was a regressor who had never regressed. The exclusive skill, Way of the Wind LV 11+1 is activated. A returnee who had never returned. The number 3 bookmark has been activated. The exclusive skill, Beast King Sensitivity LV 10+1 has been activated. Maybe I was a reincarnator. Surya's face slightly distorted as he was confronted with my status. Every time our statuses clashes, I could feel our bodies being destroyed. Surya was also pulling out all the power he could. This is too much. It is ridiculously insufficient to get the qualification of the end. I shook my head. It seems like you are mistaken about something. It isn't only the giant stories that can reach the end. Maybe Surya wouldn't understand. I had only received enlightenment after learning from Yu Jonghyuk's myriad failures. Surya's face hardened, and he concentrated his strength into his forearms. Perhaps this would be Surya's last attack. I didn't back down and stood up to him using the power of electrification. The glare of the sun that melted everything was fired towards me. The blue-white light couldn't overcome the high temperature and was pushed little by little. I had just taken a step or two back when a rough and solitary story wrapped around me from behind. It wasn't necessary to see whose story it was. The sparks between Surya and I became more intense. Slowly, the pushing stopped. The constellation, Master of Steel, is looking at you. The constellation, Master of the Skywalk, is looking at you. Lee Hyun-sung and Yu Sanga. There was also Jung Hee-won's story. The history of all those who struggled to survive was nestled inside me. The woman who woke up from a long crouch and laughed, while holding a sword to destroy evil. They weren't here, but there were others who shared our history. The boy who lost his mother, and held the insect in his hand, cried. The man who built the castle roared for the family that wouldn't come back. Li Giliang and Gong Pildu. The woman who built up the truth, by lying gladly became his shadow. There was also Han Suyang. The exclusive attribute, scenario interpreter, is activated. Everything I lived made their way into the story. Surya's incarnation body was right in front of me. Surya's weakness was something that couldn't be read with the Duke of Loyalty and Warfare stigma. Yet strangely, at this moment I knew where to stab Surya. The exclusive skill reading comprehension is activated. Unbroken faith shone brightly, and an intense white light pierced Surya's chest. There was the sound of something breaking as I poured out all my magic power before flying through the sky. Among the fragments of the story that poured through the air like a fountain, the collapsed Surya could be seen. Surya, the supreme god of light, Oedipus shouted, and the situation started falling apart. Meteorites were oxidized in the atmosphere and Surya's train collapsed. I was falling towards the ground. Kim Dokja. Yu Jonghyuk flew like the wind and grabbed me while the Chimera Dragon picked up my falling companions. It was truly a narrow escape. A few fragments of the last car left a long trail as they fell towards the ground. The shattered debris wept. Fortunately, the industrial complex wasn't going to be hit. Shin Yusung was watching me from the head of the Chimera Dragon. Ajasi. Joy could clearly be seen on the child's expression. The next moment, a voice was heard from the cloud of dust on the ground. Not yet, not yet. It was King Oedipus. The miserable-looking existence shouted at us from among the fallen constellations. The demon king of salvation. I know that the succession of the giant story hasn't ended yet. If you give us the story, we will leave here. The game was already over, but he still hadn't given up. It was Yu Jonghyuk who replied on my behalf. Why should we? Yu Jonghyuk landed on the ground, dropped me down, and took out the black demon sword. Then King Oedipus spoke. Otherwise, your precious world will disappear. Do you want to talk about fate again? I know you don't have enough probability left in the demon world. What if it isn't the demon world? He flicked his fingers, and a huge panel appeared in the air. It showed a blue planet that we knew well. Yu Jonghyuk frowned. It seems you've sold your pride as a constellation. Is this your last hurrah? At this point, it was impossible to destroy Earth even if all of Olympus probability was used. Yu Jonghyuk was aware of this and wasn't panicked at all. King Oedipus laughed. It's impossible to destroy Earth, but what about this? He flicked his fingers again, and the screen changed. At this moment, the faces of Yu Jonghyuk and the party members hardened. The Korean peninsula was engulfed in flames. If I knew this, I would have gone to the demon world. Han Suyang frowned as she gazed at Gyeonggi-do burning with red and blue flames. In fact, there was a reason why Han Suyang didn't go to the demon world. You are currently cursed by the demon king, Andras. Han Suyang had been caught in Kim Dokja's plot and cursed by the demon king. Thanks to this, she would become the meal of the demon king as soon as she visited the area. Li Giliang stomped his feet beside her and shouted, "Won't everyone be with Dokja Hyung by now? I wish I was Shin Yusung." I guess so, however that place will be harder than here. Han Suyang felt the disaster coming through the flames and gulped. After Kim Dokja's group left for the personal scenario, the disaster scenario had come to the Korean peninsula. The time limit for the disaster scenario is 30 minutes. The problem was the disaster that came this time were constellations. Damn Olympus. She didn't know what type of backdoor dealings they made with the docubus of the Bureau, but the constellations of Olympus had come as the disasters of this scenario. Due to the difficulty, the scenario would end after 30 minutes. In these 30 minutes, the Korean peninsula was likely to disappear from Earth. What are you going to do now? Gong Pildu asked while blowing out cigarette smoke. The reason the Gyeonggi-do area had lasted so far was thanks to Gong Pildu's armed fortress. Han Suyang replied, "Just hold on a bit longer. There is a way." The opponents are the incarnation bodies of constellations. There are more than 5 of them. How are you going to win? You aren't Kim Dokja. Their auras showed they were great-grade constellations. Perhaps they were ancient heroes or lesser gods of Olympus. There are only small people on this little land. Her head hurt from all the noise. Han Suying calmly pulled out a dark stone. Abyss stone. It was an item Kim Dokja told her to collect before they separated. Thanks to this item, she could send the other party members to the demon world despite lacking probability. She had used 3 so far and there were 6 remaining. The number was a bit lacking, but this was the only way. I didn't know I would use them catching bugs. As Li Giliung's insects protected the fortress and Gong Pildu's fortress continued firing, Han Suying started the descent ceremony by offering the Abyss Stone. It was just for a short time, but she could call an existence to balance this twisted scale. Sparks flew and the Abyss Stones started to disappear one by one as an offering. It was a fearsome presence who could only use a portion of their power through the 6 Abyss Stones. The sky of Gyeonggi-do turned dark and filled with thunder. A huge shadow was revealing itself behind Han Suying. Han Suying sighed lightly and slowly opened her eyes. Black Dragon, you can do whatever you like. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is grinning and revealing white teeth. Chapter 275, Giant Story 4. The Olympians swept away Seongnam in an instant and slowly narrowed the siege around Gong Pildu's fortress. Isn't this stage too small for us to come forward? The constellations thought it was disgraceful. It was natural. There were no constellations who could build up anything from this scenario. Amidst these unmotivated constellations, a constellation wearing a crown and holding an ancient spear and shield spoke. Stop complaining. Once this is over, Father says he will suggest our promotion to the 12 gods. Oedipus, really? The expressions of the constellations changed due to the words of the blind king's heir. Promotion in the nebula meant their stakes in the giant stories were increased. Haha, can we reach 1 decimal place? The stakes in a giant story were one of the measures of a constellation's strength. More stakes meant more probability, which was a source of escaping from the constraints of many scenarios. Let's finish it and go back. The constellations finally started to advance to the armed fortress. It happened the moment their star relics were shining. The sky was covered by a dark dome and light disappeared from it. The great-grade constellations approaching the armed fortress stopped at the appalling darkness. What? The lights in the area were turned off by the clouds that came. It wasn't just this area. The darkness covered the entire Korean peninsula. Even the sparks of probability were covered by the deep darkness. The blind king's heir stared up at the sky with bewildered eyes. Is it the queen of the underworld? The only nebula that could descend to the Korean peninsula today was Olympus. In addition, there were few constellations of Olympus who could use such a large amount of probability. One of the constellations emitted a faint light to reveal the surroundings, but it quickly disappeared. It was like a black hole that sucked out all the light. The anxious constellations shouted, "Your Majesty, if you have come then please say it." One of the constellations suddenly gave a warning. Something is coming. A dark object was fired from the sky and pierced the chest of one constellation. Kiyaku. It was an object like a dragon's claw. The confused constellation coughed up blood and tried to pull out the claw, but the claw grew increasingly larger and soon burst through the constellation's body. The constellation let out a sound before becoming part of the darkness. The frightened constellation screamed. Yu-woo. They heard the sound but couldn't avoid it. It meant this existence had a completely different status from them. The queen of the underworld wasn't this much. Run away. The blind king's heir discovered the situation and ordered a retreat. Then, an enormous amount of sparks burst from the armed fortress. The intense light that the darkness couldn't swallow revealed the open door of the fortress leading to the dark city. There was a woman with a small body. The first one to discover her was the blind king's heir, who trembled. Why are you? The shadows of black flames were swirling around her body. The face of a little boy with red eyes underneath black hair flashed. The boy with one arm bandaged raised his hand, and the shadow of a dragon covered the sky. White fangs were bared. As the boy laughed, the darkness of the world breathed. Then the massacre began. King Oedipus couldn't hide his astonishment as he stared at the scene on the screen. The constellation Blind King's Heir has been removed from the scenario. The constellation Thebes' Gatekeeper has been removed from the scenario. The shadow of a dragon was tearing up the fleeing constellations on the screen. Fortunately, Han Soo-young wasn't too late. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is letting out wild laughter. Han Soo-young had a bandage around one arm and half covered her face as she burst out laughing. She was really a match for the black dragon. She acted so well that I didn't know why she hated it so far. King Oedipus stared at me and exclaimed, "How come? Why is a candidate of the apocalypse?" Candidate of the apocalypse? Well, King Oedipus would have that type of information. The Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was one of the candidates of the apocalypse. Many constellations are astonished by your scheme. The constellation Dragon Lying Down is nodding. The constellation Secretive Plotter is feeling pure admiration. You have acquired a new story. The story Kill with a Borrowed Knife has been acquired. I watched Jeonggedu covered in darkness and licked my lips. Attracting the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon was a last resort. It could have brought about a bigger disaster. However, there was Han Soo-young and the promise made with the Black Dragon. Thus, he wouldn't destroy the Korean peninsula. Kuak. King Oedipus bowed his head and let out an unknown groan. We saw the unusual appearance in Yu Jonghyuk, and I raised our swords at the same time. You. King Oedipus, son, was among the constellations who suffered under the Black Dragon. There was the possibility that the enraged Oedipus wouldn't be able to control his emotions. I will kill you. As expected, the constellations who survived with Oedipus released their status at the same time. I had a giant story, but it wasn't enough power. The moment I was about to trigger electrification, something rose from the ground and caught Oedipus' neck. Cough. The huge Surya moved one of his forearms and held onto Oedipus' neck. King Oedipus stared at Surya with surprise. Why? Stop it. Surya's heavy status pressed down on the other constellation. Don't look so ugly anymore. I won't listen to the words of a dog who lost the fight. It can't end like this. The next moment, King Oedipus' body exploded. The brutally exploded body scattered into ashes in front of Surya's eyes. The movements of the constellation stiffened, and they nervously stepped back. Despite the severe injuries, Surya still had the power to stand up alone. It was a phenomenal vitality. I quickly calculated the power of my remaining companions. If we hit Surya right now, it is our defeat. For a moment, I thought I heard wrong. However, the words had definitely emerged from Surya's mouth. I bit my lips as joy boiled from deep inside my heart. The great Lakapala had admitted defeat. The winner of the Demon King selection has been determined. There were screams from afar as the ensuing system messages came. They were the screams of the dukes defeated in the Demon King selection. One by one, the bodies of the constellations staring at us scattered. The scenario ended, and the star stream started to recall the probability that they were allowed. Surya's body was also disappearing. I opened my mouth before Surya's body completely disappeared. I wanted to ask, why did he suddenly change his mind? The Demon King of Salvation. However, I shut my mouth the moment I saw Surya's eyes. In retrospect, Surya wasn't an ordinary constellation. He was one of the great Lakapala. It was rather strange that such a constellation would use cowardly tricks against us. Perhaps this selection had dealt a significant blow to his reputation and pride. Surya slowly blinked and asked, "Did you get the qualification of the end?" "I'll probably get it, and you also." Surya's eyes shone terribly, as if he was dismissing the trivial comfort. "I will watch your story." Surya would also get the qualification of the end one day. Then the day would come when we meet again. It wasn't here but in the later scenarios of the star stream. And, in a short moment, Surya's gaze turned towards the fragments of the destroyed train. They were fragments of the car where Surya and I faced each other. However, the appearance of some fragments was a bit strange. They weren't broken from the battle with me. They were scars carved on the train from before. I know. That's right, you understand. Surya finally disappeared with these words. The pressure on the surroundings vanished and a curious silence took its place. I didn't feel it was real. I calmly practiced what I had planned and was lucky with several things. Then I came all this way. The 25th main scenario has ended. I turned my head and saw Yu Jonghyuk watching Surya's disappearance. The main scenario, Demon King selection, has been cleared. The rewards for the selection are being prepared. A new Demon King has appeared in the demon world. You have become the master of the 73rd demon realm. There was the explosive system message and Yu Jonghyuk, and I simultaneously looked up at the sky. The gazes of countless beings poured towards me from the sky. The Demon King, ruler of the East Hell, is looking at you. The Demon King, devil of principles, is curious about you. The Demon King, Black Mane Lion, is inviting you to his demon realm. The constellation Mass Production Maker is sending his congratulations. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring has sent you a gift. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy is proposing a toast. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband is greatly pleased. The constellation Commander of the Red Cosmos is wary of you. It was an incomparable amount of attention. There were strong people similar to me to distant beings who I couldn't even look at their toes. There was a pause and then Jang Haeyoung's voice was heard. It's over. I nodded and looked around. Lee Hyun-sung carried Jung Hee-won while watching the sky. Lee Jae-hai supported the injured Yu Sanga and waved at me while Shin Yu-sung held onto my sleeve and looked up at me. The Breaking the Sky Master held the small Asu in her mouth and barked lightly. Han Myungo held Asmodeus, incarnation body, in his arms and let out a weary breath. On the rocky hill not far away, I could see the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyejios. The injured brash swamp predator was curled up, and Chiak Yungyong was sitting on his back. It was an ordeal that couldn't be overcome without any of them. Your nebula is well known in the star stream. A large number of constellations remember the nebula, Kim Dokja's company, temporary. Yu Jonghyuk heard the message and frowned. The name needs to be changed. I smiled at the guy who had his pride in a strange place. It wouldn't be bad to brainstorm names for the nebula sooner or later. It felt that the darkness was retreating from the sky. I could breathe for a moment from the seemingly endless trials. Your first giant story is fully blooming. The giant story, Demon World Spring, has been acquired. Citizens started emerging from the ruined industrial complex. People were intoxicated by the unbelievable victory. Some people shouted while others called out mine and Yu Jonghyuk's names. I could also see Aileen and Mark. The star stream is satisfied with your giant story. You have earned the qualification of the end. Finally, there were the messages I had been waiting for. The hidden scenario, a single story has begun. Your legendary stories has formed an opening act. The initial portion of your first giant story has been completed. After a long period of enduring, the first footstep towards the final scenario was taken. You have been given the authority of Black. The black square filtering is turned off. It was the moment when the information of the last chapter, which had long been covered with a veil, finally appeared in front of my eyes. Chapter 276. After the Demon King selection, the Yu Jonghyuk, Kim Dokja industrial complex became busy with reconstruction. The citizens' expressions were dark from the dangers of war. The atmosphere would have been harsher if it wasn't for the relief resources that I persuaded Bihyung to give. The clock tower is over there. Hey, watch out over there. Due to the deaths of the dukes, the citizens of other industrial complexes came over and I wasn't lacking manpower. I spent 2 days helping the citizens rebuild, and the city was gradually regaining a lively atmosphere. Thank you for the help, Yu Sanga SSI. The Foundation reconstruction would have taken a longer time if it wasn't for Yu Sanga's arachne's web. Yu Sanga wiped the sweat off her forehead and replied, "You should take a break, Dr. SSI. I'm fine. What about you, Sanga SSI?" Yu Sanga looked closely at the bandage wrapped around my chest while answering, "I'm good as well." Good, it was a word used by Yu Sanga. I stopped working as I climbed up the clock tower with Yu Sanga and looked down at the square. Yu Jonghyuk and the other seriously injured party members were hospitalized in Aileen's ward. Yong Hee-won and Lee Ji-hai were relatively well and helped with the reconstruction of the industrial complex. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-sung was demanding to be discharged from the ward because he was all better. Thanks to the hard work over the past 2 days, the square area started to feel like a place where people lived. The schedule was tight, but the things I were doing now would be returned to me as a reward. They came. A portal had appeared in the air. There was a kid running at great speed from one side of the square. I lightly jumped down the clock tower and greeted him. Dr. Hyung, Yue. Lee Gilyoung struggled in my arms. I smiled and patted his head. Have you been well? You seem a bit taller. Really? Yes, you're almost around Yusung's height now. I'll be bigger soon. It wasn't just Lee Gilyoung who came through the portal. A large man fell to the floor of the square with a thud. It has been a long time, Gong Pildu SSI. Bah, Gong Pildu stared at me like he didn't care about my safety and then waved to Yu Sanga. Yu Sanga bowed her head with a slight smile, and Gong Pildu spoke in a slightly more relaxed tone. I didn't come to see you. During this time, Gong Pildu had changed a lot. Who could call him one of the 10 evils now? Han Soo-young. I think she needs some time to recuperate. Lee Gilyoung answered with his head against my stomach. Recuperate? She had offered the Abyss Stones as a sacrifice, but the damage wouldn't be small because she took the Black Dragon into her body. However, to not come here. Ah, Soo-young Nuna told me to give this to you. Lee Gilyoung rummaged through his pockets and handed me a note. It was a crumpled piece of paper that gave off an obstinate impression similar to Han Soo-young. I carefully opened the note while avoiding Lee Gilyoung's glistening eyes. I will kill you if you make me do it again next time. I couldn't help laughing. Indeed, there was a reason she hadn't come. If I closed my eyes, I could still see the bandaged Han Soo-young laughing like crazy. There are still a few problems left. The note contained some other information. There were things about the Korean peninsula and the nebulae that could only be heard on Earth. Fortunately, the situation on Earth didn't deviate much from the original cycle I knew. In fact, most of the information were things I already knew and didn't need to be conveyed. Han Soo-young knew this and struggled with eloquence. Anyway, that's it. Well, goodbye, idiot. See you when you come to Earth. It was too bad. I was going to tease her properly if we met this time. I put the note in my coat and told Lee Gilyoung and Gong Pildu. There will be a party at night. Go wash up and prepare. Party? Guests are coming. I've passed one crisis, but the crisis of this industrial complex was just beginning. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy has accepted your invitation. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring has accepted your invitation. I saw numerous indirect messages pouring in and sighed lightly. Since the selection, Yu Jonghyuk hadn't woken up. How long will it take for him to recover? It should take 2 more weeks. Aileen checked Yu Jonghyuk's pulse, leaked out of the hospital room and glanced at me. You need to rest as well, do you know? Don't worry. Aileen left, but I stayed in Yu Jonghyuk's hospital room. The sleeping man's complexion was paler than any Yu Jonghyuk I had ever seen. It was natural. This was the first time that Yu Jonghyuk didn't regress despite suffering injuries serious enough to trigger regression. I stood up and checked the story packs that were stuck to him. Sometimes, a story pack being inserted incorrectly could cause death from side effects. It might be different if he had Lamar Kirin like me. Packs like these are being plugged in. I am going to a lonely world. The Sword Master was the easiest. I was a genius, since receiving the sword at 5 years old. Fortunately, Aileen was a story expert and had a good grasp on the composition. In fact, Yu Jonghyuk of the 144th round briefly went crazy after wrongly receiving Lee Hyun-sung's army story. He is a picky guy. I was almost shocked by the voice suddenly heard behind me. I looked back and saw a handsome giant leaning against the wall. "Since when were you there?" "From before you come in." The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint stared down at me with calm eyes before indicating Yu Jonghyuk. "It is too much healing. Just throw a few Murim dumplings at him and he will get better soon." "It is because there are no Murim dumplings here." Despite the words, the eyes of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint were still very mild. Then the terrible man's voice was heard. "So he is the one who beat you up." Something the size of a frog was hanging upside down from the ceiling opposite the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. It was Kyojio's Rodgram. "Master, tell me, is it this guy?" I was reminded of the nonsense I spoke to send Kyojio's to Murim. I was beat up by the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's disciple. Kyojio's handsome eyebrows curved and the aura of electrification appeared around his entire body. Was it all a lie? I gulped and opened my mouth. It wasn't completely a lie. In fact, I'm not on good terms with this guy. I was actually beaten up. "You were just beaten up." Of course, I hit back. It was a loophole in the system, but I didn't lie because I had beaten up Yu Jonghyuk in the Absolute Throne battle. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint made an intrigued expression as she listened to the story. "HRMM, you beat my disciple. Then who won?" The gazes of the new teachers met in the air. It was only their gazes collided, but the sense of space seemed to distort and sparks flew. I thought the two of them were getting along better with each other, but it seemed to be my mistake. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's voice was cold. "That is a stupid question. Just looking at the face, it is obvious that my disciple is better than yours. My disciple can't be weaker than an aura parasite who only raises muscle. Don't look down on my vision of my martial artists. Your martial artists are getting smaller." I thought the hospital room would explode if this continued, and quickly stepped in between the two of them. "I have something to ask you." The fearsome gazes shot towards me at the same time. I raised my status and barely endured the pressure. "What happened to First Murim?" I was curious. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyojio's were here, so I knew Murim was likely to be safe. However, the opponent was an outer god. The first one to speak was Kyojio's. "HMPH, this body moved personally, and you think I can't save one world?" Kyojio's flew out the window like he was offended. What was wrong with him? The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint gazed at the window that Kyojio's had disappeared through and replied, "We stopped it, but it is hard to say that we stopped it." "Did you defeat the outer god?" The aura of a giant story could be felt from the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's body. It was clearly a giant story associated with First Murim. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint nodded. "It was a daunting opponent, but it wasn't something I couldn't fight. That unlucky paradox was also present." Only the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint could describe an outer god as a daunting opponent. The problem was the next guy. The outer gods also had ranks. So to speak, there were different names for them. For example, Old One and Great Old Ones. He was neither old or a great old. However, there were also distant beings beyond such categories. I have never seen such an existence before, so I can't explain it clearly. The only thing certain is that Paradox and I together couldn't beat it. In fact, it wasn't even a fight. If it hadn't withdrawn itself, we would have disappeared from the universe along with Murim. The words of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint were strange. According to the development of the original novel, there was no such possibility that such an outer god would appear in First Murim that day. Yet such a great outer god appeared and withdrew. Disappeared like it found another delicious prey. A being that was neither old or a great old one. An outer god that forced strong people such as the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyojio's to freeze. Well, A small party was currently in progress in the central hall of the industrial complex. The recovered party members had gathered. The symbolic bodies of some invited constellations could be seen. Demon King of Salvation, did you receive the gift I sent? Persephone approached with a mischievous smile. Once again, her symbolic body took Yusanga's appearance. The party members stared at her symbolic body with surprise. In particular, Yusanga's expression was a delight to see. I don't like garter belts anymore. Persephone wore a Chinese dress and waved her fan while laughing. Is that so? It was a pretty good performance. Li Hyunsung's ears pricked up at the word performance. I spoke quickly before the wrong words could come out. I am indebted to you regarding the selection game. I didn't do anything. I know that you persuaded the master of the skywalk. Now Olympus was in a divisive state. If she hadn't persuaded Hermes, I might have had to fight more Olympus constellations in the competition. Think of it as an investment in the future. The smiling Persephone headed to the center of the hall and started dancing. She even pulled Yusanga over as her partner. At first, Yusanga was embarrassed, but then she kept a cool expression. Young Hee-won whistled. Yusanga SSI is cool. Dionysus had already finished his 10th drink in the corner, while Chiak Yungyong was sharing a cup of soju with the brash swamp predator. It was a small party, but it was more relaxed than any other party I had attended. It is a precious break. Congratulations, Demon King of Salvation. I turned back and saw an old man in a formal suit. You came, mass production maker. He was also one of the constellations who helped in this selection. I saw your story well. The Gourmet Association is making a huge fuss. You're overpraising me. I grabbed a glass from the table and bumped cups with the mass production maker. It was pretty strong alcohol based on the smell, and I poured it into my mouth. We were silent for a moment. Perhaps the mass production maker was choosing his question. The question was why he and the other constellations attended this party and why I held it. The mass production maker sipped the alcohol before speaking. You got the qualification of the end, so the filtering should be turned off. I could feel a fine change in the atmosphere. I nodded. That's right. The hall was still buzzing, but the eyes of the constellations gathered one by one on me. Persephone, Chiak Yungyong, Dionysus, everyone was pretending not to care, but they were listening to this story. The gazes of all the constellations focused on me, and the mass production maker asked, "Can I ask what your black square was?" Chapter 277. What was my black? I knew that the mass production maker would ask that question. Are you curious? Is there anyone here who isn't curious? The mass production maker laughed lightly, and several constellations coughed. The atmosphere grew unusual, and the other party members who weren't aware of the situation started to pay attention to me. Why is everyone suddenly? SHHH. Li Hyunsung tried to intrude only to be stopped by Young Hee-won. I slowly looked around at all the people in the room. All of a sudden, everyone in the hall was watching me. There were various names for it in ways of survival. For example, the Dakibai King said, "The end of every story and the beginning." However, this was what Yu Jonghyuk had to say. The damn star stream. Li Hyunsung would describe it as the whole region, while Yu Sanga might say old design. It would be graduation for Li Jihai. Surprisingly, all these interpretations of Black Square weren't wrong. The mass production maker asked, all those who have earned the qualification of the end have received a different name of the end. Do you know? It is natural since all your stories are different. In the first place, there wasn't a proper noun capable of communicating Black Square in the proper sense. The fact that the filtering was resolved meant that I could read it. Perhaps the constellations who received a hidden scenario like me were probably in a similar position. Hidden scenario, a single story. Category hidden. Difficulty. Clear condition. Complete one story to reach black. Time limit. Compensation. Failure. Currently, you have completed the initial portion. See the additional scenario description for details. The hidden scenario, a single story. This scenario was given to all those who obtained the qualification of the end. In the galaxy of the distant star stream, we went through numerous stories and completed a single perfect story. The legendary stories, the mythical stories, and even the giant story that I got were just a journey towards the single story. The mass production maker in front of me and Persephone over there would have received this scenario. Of course, the place where they finally arrived was different from me. But BU blocked the channel of the hall before I even directed her. Perhaps BU instinctively realized that the story to be told from now on was important. The protests of the constellations flowed through the air, and the mass production maker spoke in a heavy tone. My black is dried up. I was a bit surprised because I didn't think he would reveal his hand so easily. Then the dancing Persephone also spoke. I am death. Dried up and death. Both were words that could symbolize the end of something. It was a paradoxical end for the mass production maker who liked to make something, and for Persephone who governed the world of the dead. Now that they revealed their cards, I had nowhere to retreat. Everybody, please swear by your modifiers. You will never speak of what you heard here. The constellations glanced at each other. Of course. What is this? Why would we go somewhere and say it? How great is your black square that you are feeling such pressure? I didn't answer immediately and just smiled. Then a ripple started among the constellations. Don't tell me. The thoughts in the constellations' heads seemed to be visible. I looked at their expressions and thought. Yes, think about it. Be worried and suspicious. That way I would get the picture I desired. As the agitation of the drunk constellations reached the peak, I slowly opened my mouth. Han Soo-young walked down the street. They were the ruins of Seoul. There were no survivors on the streets and she was walking alone. All types of delusions passed through her head. Why was she here now? She had obviously been fighting with the constellations using the Black Dragon. No, rather, Seoul had been closed off. Why? Black Dragon. The abyssal black flame dragon didn't answer. Is anybody there? Han Soo-young wandered between the ruined buildings and shouted. The corpses of monsters hung between the familiar buildings of Gwangwamon. Han Soo-young shuddered every time she passed between nasty-smelling corpses. Every one of them was a monster she couldn't face right now. How? What happened? There was no one to answer her questions. No, she thought it would be better not to have answers, even if someone was here. If there was a living being here, they would be the terrifying monster who killed these monsters. If this was a dream, please wake up. Then a shadow of a person could be seen in the distance. It was a familiar humanoid form dressed in a white coat. Her heart was full of complicated emotions. Dokja. The moment the person looked back, there was the sound of flesh being pierced, and a knife suddenly burst out of the coat. The white coat was dyed red. Han Soo-young screamed as she woke up from her sleep. Hug. She blinked a few times, and her sense of reality slowly returned. What? She couldn't help talking to herself. Her back was wet with sweat. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is satisfied with your soliloquy. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, believes that you have now truly become his successor. Shut up. The Black Dragon was speaking bullshit, so this seemed to be reality. Han Soo-young placed a hand against her temple. Why was that person in her dream? Han Soo-young would have usually passed over the dream, but it was a world where superstition became reality. Thus, this dream couldn't be overlooked. Shortly afterwards, she noticed the bandage around her arm. God damn it, it hasn't been solved yet. Don't loosen it, you are still wounded. She looked back with astonishment and saw a woman standing there. Kim Dokja's mother. You are the only one who still calls me that. Lee Suk-young wiped Han Soo-young's back and forehead with a towel. Han Soo-young asked, why didn't you go to the demon world? What type of face would I have to go there? Kim Dokja would have liked it. He would have liked it more if you went. You don't know your son very well. Han Soo-young stuck out her small lips. Lee Suk-young laughed lightly and replaced the wet pillow with a new one. Han Soo-young sniffed the new pillow and said, "It seems to be resolved well." "What are you talking about?" "Kim Dokcha's big disaster." Seeing the Black Dragon's ecstatic state, things on the demon world side seemed well. The damage on the Korean peninsula wasn't greater than expected. There was a blow to the area, but the citizens were safely evacuated. The dream troubled her, but a dream was just a dream. "It isn't over." Lee Suk-young brought over a plate without speaking and pointed to the good or bad luck, disaster or happiness fortune floating on it. Han Soo-young read the characters rising to the surface of the water. She couldn't believe it. Thus, she asked Lee Suk-young to repeat the divination many times. They were all the same. Han Soo-young looked down at the arm wrapped with a bandage and declared, "Please contact Kim Dokcha." The night after the party ended, I sat alone in the office. Normally, it would be a good time to read Ways of Survival while relaxing with a cup of hot chocolate. However, I couldn't afford it now. I was staring at a huge debris lying on the table. It was a pierce that came off from the last car that Surya and I fought in. I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct my memories of the time. Surya's train was much shorter than the mythical train. In addition, the last car had a hole in the back. It was as if part of the train had been ripped off. In other words, that space wasn't the original last car. I opened my eyes and examined the wounds on the debris fragment again. There was something powerful enough to pull off part of Surya's train that my party members and teachers barely broke. It was also that. Knock, knock, knock. I looked up at the sound of knocking and saw Yu Sanga watching me from the door. "I'm sorry, Dokja Sasai. Am I disturbing you?" "No, I called you." I urgently arranged the table and greeted Yu Sanga. Yu Sanga looked around with a slightly shaky expression and then sat carefully on the other side of the table where I was sitting. "Would you like some tea?" "Nope, it's fine." "Then do you want water?" "Okay." We silently faced each other across the small table. I called her, but I couldn't easily bring up the topic. Yu Sanga must have many questions for me as well. I told her, "Just ask." In fact, I've been thinking about Dokja SSI for quite some time. Her tone sounded like she had been waiting. "Why do you know the future that others do know? How could you be so calm in such situations and always find answers that others haven't thought of? Then did you find out something? I seem to know some things while others don't feel right." Perhaps Yu Sanga had been studying me. Just as she studied Spanish with the app, Yu Sanga would have studied people. As always, she reached meaningful results before anyone else. To Dokja Sasai, is this world like a novel? Why do you think that? It is because of what you said at the party. As expected from Yu Sanga, really, that was the only thing I could say. I'm heading towards the final chapter. That was my answer to what black square I received. The final chapter. The end of every book that needed to be reached by turning over the pages. Yu Sanga continued speaking. The constellations were greatly surprised. There were some who were amazed and some who were shocked. The constellations had to feel surprised. It was a statement I gave with such intentions. After Dokja Sasai left, I asked the queen of the underworld, "Why are you so surprised?" What did she say? She said Dokja Sasai is very special. Yu Sanga moistened her lips with the water and continued, "I heard that every being is given a different form of black. In addition, most of them are very personal words. There are numerous black square in the world, but I heard that words that imply the end are extremely rare. Anyone who heard it would understand it meant an obvious end. It was a word that had excellent versatility for all beings. In addition, all beings who received such a clear end were great constellations like Olympus, Vedas, and Papyrus, the top deities of the massive nebulae. Now, Dokja Sasai has become one of them." Yu Sanga was staring at me with complicated eyes. Her trembling eyes held feelings that she herself couldn't measure. I replied, "It is a good thing." "It is good. Now I can finally try something." I smiled. However, Yu Sanga didn't smile back. After the destruction of the world, I thought Dokja Sasai was happier. You laughed more often than before and seemed more vigorous, thus you looked good. By the way, Sangha bowed her head. Dr. SI, why do you think this world is fiction? Sangha didn't know me. What was fiction to me? What did this world mean to me? I couldn't explain or describe it. I'm sorry, Dr. SI, I was presumptuous. Nevertheless, the only person who could tell me such things was Sangha. She was a person who noticed things that nobody cared about. The exclusive skill, character list, is activated. She was the first colleague I met. Maybe it was before this world began. The person's information can't be accessed through character list. There was an unexpected sense of relief from the rising message. Currently collecting information about the corresponding figure. When I first used character list on Sangha, I had been very anxious because I couldn't read her information. Why was it now the opposite? I sighed lightly and looked out the window. It was a clear sky. This was a world where nothing had happened yet. Sangha SSI, I'd like to ask you to do something. Thus, now was the only time to prepare. Chapter 278. The Nebula Eden. This nebula was composed of the angels of the apocalypse, was the scourge of the demons and the eternal enemies of the demon world, the guardians of the celestial world, the angels who didn't fear any evil in this world. However, there was something that the angels of this fearsome Eden hated. Elder, in Eden you are fully prepared, and bid your time before the battle. It was Metatron's ordnance time. Today, the one in charge of the lecture was the commander of the Red Cosmos, Jophiel. We urge you not to fall for the demon's two-faced war tactics. Gabriel tapped the floor with his heel and frowned. Why must it be that person today? There were thousands of low-ranked angels in the training ground of Eden. The archangels like Gabriel were positioned at the forefront as teaching assistants. Lily Pin of Aquarius, Gabriel. Guardian of Youths and Travel, Raphael. Friend of Justice and Harmony, Rhaegal. Apart from the archangel on duty, most of the top-ranking constellations of Eden were assembled. Jophiel's mental training had already been going on for an hour. Gabriel secretly yawned and looked around at his colleagues with languid eyes, only to notice something strange. Where's Uriel? Raphael, who was nodding off on the cloud, replied while fixing his curly hair. Is being detained. Detained. Is being told off by the scribe, don't you know? What did she do? Raphael borrowed the power of the wind to speak like it was annoying. Gabriel's eyes widened. What really, Uriel? Yes, she is banned from broadcasting for 3 years. That Uriel was going to be confined for 3 years. Gabriel laughed at the unexpected news. The time being, the broadcast bulletin board will be clean. The ordinance ended after 30 minutes. Metatron dismissed the low-grade angels and called the archangels separately. Scribe of Heaven, Metatron had gray hair that went down to his waist, and his expression seemed tired today. It was because he was busy trying to prevent the possibility of Armageddon. Metatron pushed up his thin frame glasses and spoke, "Thank you for the trouble, Jophiel. It was a good presentation." Jophiel nodded. Metatron looked around at the archangels and asked, Uriel didn't come. Didn't you detain her? Otherwise she would be here. The other archangels giggled at Gabriel's words. However, Metatron didn't laugh. The archangels exchanged looks with each other. There was no angel here who didn't know that Uriel was a headache for the scribe. The first one to speak was Archangel Rhaegal, who had faint freckles on his cheeks. Excuse me, scribe. Isn't 3 years of detainment too much? Recently, Uriel has become quite bright due to the broadcast. For the constellations who had to endure the boring years, the meaning of the live broadcast was immense. Some angels called the live stream broadcasting the only drug allowed in Eden. What are you saying, Rhaegal? Do you know how many times the scribe let that watch? Rhaegal's expression hardened at Gabriel's words. Gabriel, insulting a fellow angel is a felony. Did I say something wrong? When she was bored, she picked up a demon's neck and did something strange. Gabriel. It was Metatron who calmed down the tense atmosphere. I will decide how to deal with Uriel. The sublime aura rising from Metatron caused all the excited angels to close their mouths. As the surroundings became silent, Metatron brought up the main point. In connection to the Demon World Convention, I'm going to give you a new assignment. The Demon World Convention. The expressions of the archangels became tense. The balance between Eden and the demon world had been shaken by the recent armed conflict in the 73rd demon realm. We need an archangel to monitor the ruler of the 73rd demon realm, the demon king of salvation. Confusion filled the angels' faces. Gabriel asked in a sharp voice, "Wait, isn't that originally Uriel's mission? And what does it have to do with the Demon World Convention?" "It is relevant. Now that Uriel is being detained, other archangels need to do her work." Metatron's gaze moved across the archangels. Raphael had a doctrines tour next week in Regal, is scheduled to visit Vedas, so the mission. The scribe's eyes finally stopped on one archangel. Me. In the days after the party members enjoyed a sudden luxury. "Doc SSI, can I accept something like this? I bought it for Hyunsung SSI." Kim Dokja bought clothes or items for the party members every day from the Dokibai Bad, as if compensation for his absence in the meantime. The kids were particularly excited. "Hey, look at this Shin Yusung." I received it as well. Shin Yusung and Lee Gilyoung laughed and ran through the streets while covered with accessories bought by Kim Dokja. Yong Hee-won saw the scene and laughed. The kids looked like a Christmas tree. The two children were sitting on Lee Hyunsung's big shoulders. The same was true for Lee Hyunsung. He was excited about the new shield he received from Kim Dokja. "Three fools," she muttered as she looked around and saw Lee Jihai approaching while wearing a triangular gimbap-like helmet on her head. If the other three were like a Christmas tree, she was a three-tier cake. "Do you have a good relationship with Dr. Ajasi these days?" "I have belatedly realized the importance of colleagues." Lee Jihai narrowed her eyes at Yong Hee-won's reaction. "Unni, perhaps you haven't received anything." "I don't need it." In fact, Kim Dokja had visited Yong Hee-won several times. However, he didn't give her any items and only taught her a few training methods as well as telling her about hidden pieces. She told him that they were things she could do without him, and Kim Dokja's expression was still vivid in her mind. She was going to give Lee Jihai some honey when someone poked her shoulder. She looked back and saw the tired Kim Dokja. Dokja Sasai." Kim Dokja had dark circles on his face as he held out something towards Yong Hee-won. "This. It is a new suit. It will be more comfortable for you." Yong Hee-won accepted the clothes in a daze. It was a blue-black special suit with a large cloak. She had seen it at the exchange but gave up because it was too expensive. "The clothes are too expensive. I still have enough." Kim Dokja silently shook his head. Yong Hee-won saw his unknown facial expression and recalled a memory from a long time ago. During the days at Cheongmuro, she received an outfit from Kim Dokja. At the time, it was a rag. The constellation Bald General of Justice is disappointed with Incarnation, Yong Hee-won. "You agreed to be my sword. I should do at least this much for you." Kim Dokja said these words and instantly walked away like he had something else happening. Yong Hee-won stared at Kim Dokja's back and touched the special uniform in her hands. Lee Jihai grinned from next to her, Unni's mouth. "What?" "Nothing, I just found something from the corners of your mouth. Unni, if you don't like it then exchange it with my helmet. That suit is really romantic." "I don't want to." She looked closer and saw a pattern on the suit that was similar to Lee Hyunsung's shield. "Made by Yang Woo-san." Yong Hee-won wasn't fluent in English, scratched her head and gave up reading. In any case, it was good. "By the way, why is Ajasi suddenly doing this? The person who sold food for money." "I don't know. He might be plotting something strange like before." It certainly wasn't strange if it was Kim Dokja. He gave her such a good item that he would definitely put her to tremendous use. Yong Hee-won looked at the suit and felt like an office worker who received a salary advance. She was discussing with Lee Jihai how to wear the coat more stylishly when someone appeared, and passed her like a ghost. Sanga Sasai, what's going on? Huh, yes, it's nothing. Yu Sanga, who was staring blankly into space, reacted with surprise. Her pupils were empty. Yong Hee-won realized that something was strange and tried to speak, but Lee Jihai was one step faster. Aha, I understand. Sanga Uni hasn't received an item. Yong Hee-won poked Lee Jihai's ribs and she let out a light shriek. Yu Sanga smiled helplessly. I just have many thoughts these days, Hee-won SSI, that is a wonderful outfit. Yes, Doc SSI gave it, I think it is too much to wear it. I think it suits you very well. Is that so? Thank you. Yong Hee-won scratched his head. There was a shining bracelet that hadn't been seen before on Yu Sanga's wrist. The mood became awkward and Yong Hee-won asked awkwardly, all right, how is Dr. Sasai lately? Dr. Sasai. Yu Sanga's expression asked what she meant. Yong Hee-won, who might have been misinformed, started speaking gibberish. I just wanted to know if the two of you are doing well. Yu Sanga cocked her head to one side and muttered, I think it is the same as when we were in the company. Was similar to when they were at the company. It was a difficult response for a hopeful observer. Lee Jihai whispered to Yong Hee-won. Didn't I tell you before, there is nothing between them. Dr. Ajasi's taste doesn't go that way. I understand why my sponsor likes you. By the way, has your master woken up? Not yet. I heard it would take a few more days. In the distance, Kim Dokja seemed to be talking to himself as he headed towards the ward. Is there something to give? The clock tower was on the verge of completion. The boisterous laughter of the party members could be heard. Gong Pildu was dissecting something like a machine gun, while Han Myungo was testing a new prosthetic leg. Without knowing why, Yong Hee-won felt overwhelmed. In any case, the party was all gathered now. They would soon return to Earth and go through the hellish scenarios again. Even so, Yong Hee-won was afraid. Yong Hee-won watched the sunset from the clock tower and recalled the words she heard in the theater dungeon. I wish to see the novel's epilogue. At the time, the Kim Dokja who said these words seemed very lonely. She didn't know what he meant at the time, but now she felt like she knew a bit. Now one thing was clear. When the epilogue came, Kim Dokja wouldn't be alone. It was a few days after the part ended. The constellations present in the industrial complex started to leave one by one. I went to see the constellations off and found 2 flowers in the chest pocket of my coat. What is this? It was a pair of red cosmos and a lily. It wasn't a very suitable combination. Did the kids do it? I took care of the flowers and headed towards the square. Some constellations had already passed through the portal. Among those leaving were constellations who signed a special contract with the Kim Dokja's company Nebula, including the old man in front of me. It looks like you're preparing for war. You don't have to be so impatient. In the scenario, it is always war. The mass production maker chuckled at my words. Don't be senseless. I want you to be different from the other constellations. Thank you for the help. I smiled and bowed my head. The mass production maker opened the door of the car before stopping and looking at me. There is one final thing I want to ask. Yes, feel free to ask. The mass production maker didn't immediately ask the question. Instead, he pulled out a cigarette and mumbled, Have you ever thought about what exactly black is? He turned on his lighter and touched the end of the cigarette to the flame. The mass production maker sighed and blew out smoke before continuing. Is it the place we want to reach or the place destiny is leading us to? Is it a place, a life, or a space? Perhaps the mass production maker had thought about this question countless times. Finally, he wouldn't have found the answer. The certain thing is that it is the end of the story. Sometimes I find your calmness amazing. I'm nervous as well. I felt it at the time of the Gourmet Association, but you're not as good at lying as you think. The mass production maker laughed like a child. Then I'm asking you, is your black square really the final chapter? The words broke through my guard. I reflexively shut my lips. The mass production maker waited patiently for my answer. I finally opened my mouth once the mass production maker's cigarette was burned halfway through. I don't know where the story will take me. However, I'm sure that the place I want to go is the final chapter. He continued to listen after I finished. It was as if my story was still ongoing. Once the remaining cigarette had been burned, the mass production maker laughed. I hope that I'm on the last page with you. Go carefully, old man. Be careful. There was a light engine sound, and the mass production maker's car slipped into the portal. The other constellations also disappeared into the portal. The portal closed and ominous sparks filled the empty sky. I watched the sparks and touched the petals in my pocket. Now the remaining time was 3 days. Soon, the most important story of the industrial complex would begin. Chapter 279, Demon King of Salvation 1. A door with an image of 2 baby angels blushing. Gabriel's lips twitched as he saw the Uriel written on the nameplate. Hey! There was no answer when he knocked on the door. Thus, he did it again. Hey, Uriel! He knocked harder on the door, and there was a groan from beside it. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, says to get lost. Gabriel frowned at the indirect message. Do you think I'm happy to come here? I'm here because of my mission. Gabriel sounded like it was annoying just to speak. It had been 2 days since he received the unreasonable assignment from Metatron. He was planning to play around, but Metatron got in front of him. Gabriel, please take over Uriel's mission. In addition, Jophiel will watch Gabriel to ensure he isn't being lazy. Leave it to me. He was placed in a team with the upright Jophiel. Gabriel would rather be in a team with Uriel. Didn't you record your observations of the Demon King of Salvation? I came here to grab it. Open the door. There was a rustling sound from beyond the door. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is asking why you are her successor. Yes, you black square. Once again, an indirect message rang like a thunderbolt. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, says, black, 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 black. Do you want to come out and say it yourself? The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is asking if you are her only successor. Me and Jophiel. A deep sigh was heard beyond the door. After a while, there was a gap in the door and long fingertips emerged. Looking closer, the white fingertips were holding onto something. Gabriel realized its identity and clicked his tongue. USB? Who uses a USB these days? Are you a human? The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is warning you not to speak nonsense and take it. Gabriel received the USB, and Uriel added. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, says it is a secret from the red cosmos. Jophiel, why? Uriel didn't respond and shut the door. Then intermittent sniffling was heard in the distance. Gabriel was about to say something only to end up pouting. They usually didn't get along, but he became worried when he saw Demon Hunter Uriel like this. Hey, don't tremble. The detainment will be released soon. It's only 3 years. The constellation, demon-like judge of fire, is shouting at you to get lost. Crazy Black Square. I was only trying to comfort Black Square. After a while, Gabriel opened the USB in his room. Then, what the hell did you do on this mission? Despite his mutters, Gabriel couldn't take his eyes off the footage on the screen. The constellation, Lily Pin of Aquarius, is curious about you. The constellation, Lily Pin of Aquarius, likes looking at you. Young Hee-won frowned as she heard the voice in the air. Uriel disappeared, and this time, a strange constellation clung to her. This wasn't her only concern. Young Hee-won looked at Kim Dokja, who was wandering in the distance. Why isn't he saying anything? What do you mean? Young Hee-won turned around and see Lee Ji-hae closely stuck to her. Never mind. Why, what is it? It's nothing. Honey, are you going to join Kim Dokja's company? Young Hee-won, who was swallowing the drink she bought from a street vendor, gasped as she choked. What? No, the name is too strange. Isn't it embarrassing to join a place like that? I'm looking forward to it. The company name is a bit strange, but it feels like I'm experiencing the workplace. Perhaps I will even receive a salary. If you know what a real workplace is like, you'll think differently. Lee Ji-hae pouted. In any case, I'm looking for a chance to join. Master is also there. Yu Zhanghyuk SSI has already joined. Dr. Ajasi said so. This is Yu Zhanghyuk and my nebula. Of course, he never said anything like that, but Jung Hee-won reflexively looked up at the sky. However, she didn't hear the indirect message she was waiting for. She felt strangely uncomfortable. The constellation, Lily Pin of Aquarius, dislikes the humor of Incarnation Lee Jihai. Jung Hee-won shook her head and looked at Kim Dokja, who was busy in the square. He was so busy she hadn't seen his face for a few days, and she didn't know what he was working so hard on. Then Yu Sanga's appearance caught Jung Hee-won's eyes. Jung Hee-won waved at Yu Sanga, who was sitting on a bench and staring blankly into empty air. Sanga SSI, are you going to join Dr. SC's nebula? Yu Sanga discovered Jung Hee-won and looked up with surprise. What was this woman thinking about that she lost her soul for a few days? My situation is a bit. Ah, that's right, it is tough for Sanga SSI. Yu Sanga was an incarnation of Olympus. It was a special case where she was supported by an entire nebula, and it would be hard to join Kim Dokja's nebula. It was obvious what would happen if she received the sponsorship only to choose another nebula. Instead, I made an alliance offer. Some of the constellations have a friendly relationship with Dokja SSI through me. Don't all the constellations of Olympus hate Dokja SSI? Not all of them. Hee-won SSI, did you join the nebula? I'm still thinking about it. Jung Hee-won looked back at the square again. In fact, I'm not sure about joining. There is a problem with my sponsor and... Jung Hee-won's high self-esteem seemed hurt, and Yu Sanga smiled gently. I think you will be a great help to Dokja SSI if you join his nebula. I want to help if possible. Fortunately or unfortunately, Jung Hee-won wasn't the only one in a complicated situation. In the middle of the distant square, Lee Hyun-sung sat down like a dull big dog. Next to him were Shin Yu-sung and Lee Gil-young, who were squatting like baby cats as the three of them stared at Kim Dokja. To be exact, their eyes chased after him every time he moved. It was obvious what they were waiting for. Kim Dokja ignored them to the end. There is still no word. Jung Hee-won nodded at Lee Jihai's words. He will speak when the time comes. It is because he is a secretly introverted person. Well, she also wanted to know what was going on. A long-awaited peace had come to the party, but Kim Dokja was still thinking about something. Thus, they could only wait while doing nothing. The constellation, Lily Pin of Aquarius, is looking at you approvingly. The constellation, Commander of the Red Cosmos, is wary of the Demon King of Salvation. There were strange angels, so Jung Hee-won wouldn't be bored for a while. Jung Hee-won reluctantly put down her worries. Then the work suddenly began. Really, there is no way to contact them. The channels leading to the demon world are blocked. It is a powerful enchantment. Han Soo-young's expression became grim at Lee Suk-young's words. She had been calling the Dakibus since a while ago, but none responded. Han Soo-young looked down at the water bowl that contained the good or bad luck, disaster or happiness fortune. Misfortune, 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 misfortune. She couldn't count how many times misfortune emerged. What the hell is going on? The last time great misfortune appeared, Kim Dokja had to face a Lokapala of Vedas. However, now there were so many misfortunes. It wasn't a great misfortune, but it should be an extensive misfortune. The water in the bowl trembled and faint sparks appeared. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is raising his head. Black Dragon. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is looking at the 73rd demon realm. Do you know something? The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, is letting out a threatening cry. Her arm wrapped with a bandage was tingling, and sparks appeared around the body that was in sync with the black dragon. Hey dude! The feelings of the black flame dragon were transmitted. The black dragon had never acted like this whenever he encountered an opponent. The constellation, expert at playing both sides, has pale lips. The constellation, Guam Divine Doctor, is dripping saliva. The constellation, Great King Hyunchen Hongdo Jumunwimu, is quietly putting down his sword. The constellation, first spiritualist of Joseon, is clearing his traces. The constellations of the Korean peninsula were turning off their lights. It was as if they were hiding from a predator. Her bandaged arm kept tingling. Han Soo-young scattered Lee Suk-young's divination and unraveled the bandage to reveal the tattoo of the black dragon that was shining. Sparks burst, and Han Soo-young's right arm wrote letters in the air. A disaster of the stars is coming. Disaster of the stars, what is that? The arrogant, abyssal black flame dragon thought this situation was so urgent he had to manually write. She felt the will of the abyssal black flame dragon that wanted to stop her from going to the demon world no matter what. Hey, don't make me nervous. Are you doing this again? She had been fooled by the abyssal black flame dragon more than once or twice. She didn't know what the black dragon was talking about, but Kim Dokja had predicted Olympus, invasion of the Korean peninsula. Thus, maybe he knew about this situation, no matter what came. There were faint sparks as Han Soo-young's hand moved through the air like a brush. The 73rd demon realm will perish. It was the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint who noticed it first. She was lying on the wall of the industrial complex and dropped the smoking pipe in her mouth. That guy was right. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint mumbled, while the Breaking the Sky Sword emitted a blinding light as it was pulled out. After obtaining the name Breaking the Sky Sword, she held this sword less than 10 times. It was a sword that made her be called the Disaster of Murim. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint felt the texture of the sword against her palm and felt funny. A disaster. What could be called a disaster? For human beings, disasters were natural phenomenon on a large scale. For examples, landslides, tsunamis, and earthquakes. They were huge phenomenon that the power of humans couldn't resist. For transcendence, it was nothing more than a manipulation of physical phenomena. They were existences far beyond human standards. They could cause landslides and tsunamis with a blade and could quiet them. For transcendence, like the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint, the word disaster meant something different from the standards of ordinary humans. Perhaps the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint was facing the answer now. Small sparks bounced and Kyuji's was suddenly by her side. The aura of electrification was already rising from Kyuji's body. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint slowly raised her magic power. The two transcendents looked at the distant end of the void. Kyuji's asked, "It is him." It wasn't yet visible to the naked eye, but a presence was clearly heading towards this place. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint replied in a heavy voice, "There is no doubt. It is the guy who tried to devour the first Murim." Darkness was entering the atmosphere. From the other side of the universe that swallowed up even light, something was approaching while devouring the scattered probability. Chapter 280, Demon King of Salvation 2. Hidden Scenario, Escape the Demon World has begun. At this time, all docubus of the Bureau were concentrating on the panel. Are you kidding me? Why is there no docubi to proceed when the scenario is released? It was the other docubus who blocked Bihyung rioting alone. After the Demon King selection, all docubus who operated the channels were withdrawn from the 73rd Demon Realm. Where is Baram? Shit, that Dokgek jerk. What are you doing here? Why the Demon World channels are running out of control? If you're going to do this, let me go there. Bihyung, do you think it is possible to broadcast now? Even the prideful Dokgek had given up on this scenario. The Bureau had exhausted all the available probability during the Demon King selection. Of course, that wasn't the only problem. But there was the cry of a baby docubi who knew nothing. Some docubus sighed and turned their eyes away, while others couldn't take their eyes off the screen to the end. The distant presence had crossed the star stream and was covering the sky of the 73rd Demon Realm. Not all beings lived in the scenario. If the constellations were living in a story, the outer gods were based on a confused story. They were beings born from the subconscious of the story, a monster roaming the deep sea of the scenario that wasn't possible for the docubus. This isn't the right scenario. Bihyung looked at it. that was opening its massive mouth and prayed with a gloomy heart. "Run away, Kim Dokja. What is this?" It was only a few minutes after Jung Hee-won had noticed it. Suddenly, the hairs on her body rose and sweat flowed down. She looked around and saw the citizens who lost consciousness or were vomiting up blood on the ground. Lee Jihai stood beside her and was squeezing her shoulders with dim eyes. "Jihai, wake up." Her shoulders shook several times before Lee Jihai barely managed to look up. "Yua, Unni." Her nails dug into her shoulders and blood was flowing. Jung Hee-won looked around the square. Yu Sanga was already moving. "Everyone, gather this way." Her voice was filled with magic power, and the party members came to their senses one by one. What is that?" Lee Hyun-sung and the children looked up at the sky. Lee Gil-young staggered while Shin Yu-sung grabbed onto Lee Hyun-sung and trembled. At this moment, all the party members in the square were thinking the same thing. It didn't matter how many books they read or how many words they knew. "It can't be described." Yu Sanga, Lee Hyun-sung, and Jung Hee-won were the same. All human words were helpless in front of the coming existence. The entire sky was covered by the darkness of this being. The party members couldn't understand what they were seeing. Thanks to this, they lost their means to cope. If a typhoon blew, they could place newspapers against the window. If a tsunami occurred, they could enter sturdy high-rise buildings. If a fallout started, they could hide in a basement with thick barriers. But this, how the hell could they stop it? Was it possible to stop it? Then a man appeared in the sky where the light had disappeared. He exhausted his probability as he shone brightly. Jung Hee-won discovered his appearance and was filled with relief. Most of the constellations who attended the banquet left the demon world 2 days ago. However, it wasn't everyone. Surrounded by brilliant sparks, the man stood on the walls. He shouted loudly, "Everyone, wake up." Goryeo's first sword, Chiak Yungyong. The huge roar echoed from the walls, and the incarnations with the strongest minds barely regained their sanity. They watched Chiak Yungyong. They didn't know what was coming, but there was Chiak Yungyong on this side. Chiak Yungyong also had experience fighting against an outer god. "Outer god, why did you come here? This isn't your scenario." It was a resounding yell towards the sky. A light of hope emerged in the faces of the incarnations after they heard this voice. Chiak Yungyong shouted once again. What a great foreign power, eating up the extra probability. Despite the repeated calls, there was no response from the sky. Just like an elephant didn't see an ant, it didn't even look at Chiak Yungyong. Chiak Yungyong's expression hardened. If the elephant didn't see an ant, then he would make it look. Black, 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 indescribable distance. At this moment, something stared at Chiak Yungyong. Sparks exploded from Chiak Yungyong's body. His outer skin was charred black. Chiak Yungyong's tight muscles were ruptured and blood flowed as a broken star relic flew through the air as ashes. It was the price for merely calling the name. Nevertheless, Chiak Yungyong raised his sword without backing down. It is a sword that cuts the mountains, the sea, and even the sun. With this sword, I'll cut you this time. The enormity that couldn't be grouped into one description filled Chiak Yungyong's eyes. He didn't know where to cut because he couldn't see where it started or ended. In the infinity that even a handful of possibilities didn't exist, Chiak Yungyong moved. Oh! A beam of light shot from Chiak Yungyong, cutting 1,000 people with one sword, cutting a great mountain with 2 swords, separating the sea with 3 swords. The sword shone like a meteor shower as it moved through the vast darkness. For a moment, a ray of light was drawn into the depths of the sky. The incarnations saw the light and were thrilled. Goryeo's first sword was fighting the outer god. The next moment, they heard a strange noise in the sky. It was the sound of a star that had finished its life cycle in a distant galaxy. Then something fell from the sky. Someone with good vision discovered it first. The cut-off arms and legs. Only half of the incarnation body was left, and the areas cut off were falling to the ground. Surprise and disbelief. Even those who couldn't see Chiak Yungyong's expression knew what he was feeling. A sword that cut a mountain, a sea, and even the sun. There was something that this swordsmanship couldn't cut. It was unbreakable from the beginning. It was the breaking the sky sword saint who caught Chiak Yungyong's ruined body. Remember the sword. Chiak Yungyong's incarnation body died and he left. It was the incarnation body of a narrative-grade constellation. He broke Surya's train and cut off the legs of an outer god. Yet such a constellation lost his incarnation body in a single moment of battle. Yuyak. The screams of the citizens were heard as fear encroached on their mind. The darkness filled the horizon in all directions. The ground wriggled and moved like a fetus. It was the sound of a giant worm eating its prey. It seemed that the horizon was getting closer. The intensity of the light shining on the ground gradually decreased. The 73rd demon realm is groaning with pain. The breaking the sky sword saint and Kyajios had already seen this scene in the first Murim. Kyajios spoke, "I'm going to die here because of my crazy disciple. Neither you or I have any luck with our disciples." The world let out a scream. The darkness filled with greed was approaching and eating the 73rd demon world. Kyajios concentrated all the magic power of the white pure star energy. This is why we have to stick to probability. The indescribable distance. The outer god called the disaster of the stars was in a sense a probability storm itself. It was the janitor who came from chaos caused by rules of the star stream being broken. Things have already gone wrong, so it can't be helped. I twist it with all my strength. The breaking the sky sword saint cried out, and two transcendent lights shone brightly. The sword of breaking the sky that split apart the sky. She held the power of first Murim in her arms as the breaking the sky sword saint shot towards the sky. Breaking the sky swordsmanship. Destruction skill. Breaking the sky meteor. It was the sword technique that Yu Zhanghyuk had used in the past. It was the breaking the sky swordsmanship that defeated countless constellations. The first breaking the sky sword shot towards the sky. The explosive magic power was radiant in the air, and the meteor sword drew colorful shapes. However, it didn't even receive a scratch. Like dust drifting in space, the sword disappeared into the void. Her swordsmanship that broke the sky couldn't destroy the universe. Kyajios. Kyajios received the signal and stepped on the breaking the sky sword saint's shoulder before jumping. Kyajios accelerated with the power of electrification, penetrating through the atmosphere and flying into the expanse. An unending universe. In the shadow of the darkness, Kyajios felt the darkness covering the sky and the gaze of the stars looking from beyond the darkness. The constellation, prisoner of the golden headband, is emitting a golden light. The constellation, abyssal black flame dragon, is roaring. It was a place where stars stayed. It was a place that could never be reached with short human arms. Kyajios also knew it. Thus he tried and tried again. He stepped on the meteor fragments left behind by the breaking the sky sword saint, and Kyajios jumped higher and higher. He rushed towards the unreachable stars, and the mortal existence who built his history through hard work finally reached the stars. He reached the universe. Kyajios finally reached a position where he could see it. It was reminiscent of a huge fog. The fog without a definite shape was greedily devouring the 73rd demon realm. The center of the fog contained a thread left behind by Chiak Yungyong. The blue-white power climbed to the limit and was concentrated in Kyajios' right hand. From the smallest particle, the universe began. Kyajios' right hand moved along with his fierce cry. Like a big bang, the blue-white energy struck the center of the fog. There was a white flash and all citizens closed their eyes. It was the moment the two transcendent forces overwhelmed the darkness covering the universe. The moment the light was turned off, there was a huge crack in the darkness that covered the sky. The citizens shouted, he did it. He did it, the transcendent did it. However, the breaking the sky sword saint's expression wasn't good. The breaking the sky sword saint looked at Kyajios piercing through the expanse and laughed faintly. It is up to here. Beyond the falling Kyajios, the sky was splitting. Something in the darkness was awakening. It was a pupil. A huge eye had come to the world. The white lens and black pupils followed the falling Kyojios. The breaking the sky sword saint moved and Kyojios turned around. The transcendent power collided with an irresistible atmosphere. Kyojios' long hair turned white. The breaking the sky sword saint's muscles swelled up until they seemed like they were going to burst. As if suffering from aging, the two transcendent bodies were dying in front of the distant time. The status of the universe was different. They became transcendent beyond mortals and gained the power to destroy constellations. However, the history of the grueling training they went through was dust compared to the history of the universe. The indescribable distance is looking at the 73rd demon realm. The citizens became crazy and rushed around. Escape, escape. Kiek. The citizens wept like wild beasts without knowing what they were saying. The portal can't be used due to the intervention of a strong presence. What? www what? www what? The bodies of the citizens burst all over. Some of them turned into bizarre beings, and others had tentacles emerge from their mouths. The world was going crazy. However, it wasn't everyone. Before the gaze of that absurd being, there were those who didn't lay down their swords. Not yet, we can fight. It was Young Hee-won. Young Hee-won gasped but didn't kneel down as she controlled her nausea. One by one, the party members stood beside her. The reason they were able to endure was simple. The giant story, Demon World Spring, is protecting the incarnations. It was because this world was refusing to perish. They were the history of this 73rd demon realm. The constellation Queen of the Darkest Spring is shouting to flee. The constellation Abandoned Lover of the Labyrinth is screaming. The constellation Coi Ill Pill is closing his eyes in pain. The party members also knew it. Any power they had was shabby in front of that mighty being. Young Hee-won grabbed the sword of judgment and coughed up blood as she shouted, "Uriel, please." There was no reaction from the demon-like judge of fire. It was the same for Gong Pildu's defense master and Lee Hyun-sung's master of steel. This time, they didn't respond to the request of the incarnations. No, they couldn't respond. All the stars in the night sky are silent. The constellations in the sky didn't offer anything. Just as thunder and lightning couldn't be controlled, that wasn't something that could be received. The terrified Asu pissed. Jang Haeyoung collapsed on the ground and vomited. The senseless Gong Pildu started to build meaningless walls. Han Myung-go shivered and looked around for a place for his one leg. However, his foot didn't move. In front of the creature that devoured the world, there was no straw for his foot. Dokja Sesai. Then there was Kim Dokja. Yu Sanga cried out and everyone looked at the same place. It was the top of the unfinished clock tower. As time flowed slowly, Kim Dokja stood on the edge of the tower. The constellation, Demon King of Salvation, is looking at the night sky. A star that uniquely illuminated the night sky that had its light turned off. It was the Demon King of Salvation.